I don't know if you remember me, but I'm deep in the reads, and I like to talk about books online sometimes. But it's been a while since I've been able to do that because I've been super busy getting ready for a solo art exhibition. I'm also participating in a major group show at the same time, and I've got an artist residency coming up in like less than a month. So yeah, I've been just grinding away, but I finally found some time to actually record a frickin' video again. So here I am to talk about my 5 favorite reads from 2024. The first book I want to talk about is Dirty Snow by George Simenon. Now, you may have never heard of George Simenon, but he was an extremely well-known author in the 19th century. Not only was he one of the most prolific authors, writing over 400 novels, but he was one of the best-selling authors of the 1900s as well. He wrote between the 20s and the 70s, and is best known for a detective series following a character named Jules Maigret. But later on in his career, after the war, he left the pulpy, dime store, hard-boiled crime fiction for stuff that's a little bit more serious, a little bit more brooding, and a little bit more literary. That's what Dirty Snow is. It's set during the Nazi occupation of Belgium during World War II, where it's a time of desperation in the community. A lot of people are pretty much impoverished and they're on wartime rations. It's hard to afford food or heat, things like that. But 19-year-old Frank and his mother Lotte are considerably well off. Frank makes money from petty crime and theft, while Lotte makes money as the leading lady in a whorehouse. It's a brothel that she runs. So basically both of them are making money off of the exploitation and desperation of their neighbors, and they're kind of seen as pariahs for that. Frank is a really tough character to follow. The way he treats people is disgusting, but it's just a reflection of the way that his society is being treated by the occupying power. So there's definitely parallels there. And anyway, in the opening pages of the book, Frank murders somebody. And then you kind of see his life as he bums around and he gets involved in crime with his friends, things like that. And then the second half of the book has this major shift where all of a sudden the things that have been set up in the first half of the book start to pay off in a very meaningful way. And you start to see the consequences of living in this society or doing the things that Frank does. It's a really interesting reflection on community and what happens when you are just in it for yourself. I think this is a great existential, nihilistic examination of what this period was like. And although I didn't quite get the ending, there was still a lot here to sink my teeth into that I really resonated with. The next book I want to talk about I don't own a copy of, so we'll just have to imagine that it's there. It's a bit of a weird one, so I have to give a little bit of a caveat when I recommend it. The book is Picnic at Hanging Rock by Joan Lindsay. Now, it's a mystery novel, but once again, I have to put out the disclaimer, it's not a conventional mystery by any means. You're not going to be like slowly getting more and more information only for the author to reveal everything that happened at the end. This book leaves you hanging very intentionally. It makes you linger in uncertainty and grapple with like the fear of the unknown and the fear of the uncontrollable that all the characters are going through as well. So, it's about these 3 girls and their teacher who go missing when their all-girl boarding school takes a trip to Hanging Rock for a picnic. The book doesn't focus so much on solving the mystery as it does in showing you like the domino effect of what happens when this prestigious school is struck with this scandal and are kind of scrambling to try and find these girls. And you see this carefully curated, perfectionist facade start to fracture as nobody can find the girls at all. There's no evidence to uncover. But at the same time, I believe that this book can be figured out. I was adamant about this when I was reading it with my book group, that there is a lot of intention with how Joan Lindsay sets up the story and how she hints at deeper meanings with the themes, with the characters' subtle interactions. You can start to tell what's going on beneath the surface. Many of the book's themes are about like striking a contrast between this ordered civil colonialist society on the one hand and this untamed and mysterious wilderness on the other, and how these two things are incompatible with each other. I just love how dreamlike most of this is, how it really feels at times like that ominous sensation you read when you learn about these unsolved mysteries in real life. There's a lot to appreciate in this novel, and although I think it's going to be frustrating for a lot of readers, although it is very slow-paced and does drag at times, I thought it was a really fresh take on a very familiar concept of a story. But I would just caution you and urge you to read this book closely, because it has a lot more going for it than it seems like it does on the surface. Speaking of unusual books, this next one is a little bit unorthodox as well, if you excuse the pun. The book is called Stalin, Passage to Revolution, by Ronald Grigor Suni. You're probably wondering what's unusual about a biography on Stalin. Well, you'll sort of pick up on it being a little bit odd just from the premise alone, because instead of dealing with Stalin when he's the dictator of the Soviet Union, Passage to Revolution only focuses on his early life. It ends right when the Bolsheviks seize power in 1917, and instead of being a conventional narrative, this is a extremely dense political theory book masquerading as a typical biography. It doesn't go into detail much on things like the 1905 revolution or even the 1917 revolutions. Instead, those events mostly happen off-page or get summed up in a paragraph or two, and the book focuses instead on chapter after chapter of meticulously breaking down the political theory and the competing ideologies that were bubbling under the surface of the Tsar's empire. So you see how this altruistic, egalitarian ideology of Marxism gets twisted and warped gradually throughout the book until you can see the seeds being planted for one of the worst dictatorships of the 20th century. So you really get to grapple with the tyrannical underpinnings of the Bolsheviks. You can see all of these ominous warnings of the man that Stalin will become, even as he's helping workers organize and things like that. But at the same time, Suni does not demonize these people. You understand why a lot of Marxists, even today, really like Vladimir Lenin, for example, because you have these long passages that quote the words of people like Lenin or Stalin or Trotsky, and a lot of what they're ostensibly claiming to fight for are things that I agree with as well, where I'm just like, okay, no, I understand why you would want people to have more representation in the government, to be able to vote, to be able to share in a bigger piece of the pie when they're working for a capital machine or something like that. But then you also see how the Bolsheviks kind of are envious of the Tsar's control of Russian peasants, because they employ a lot of the same strategies for silencing dissent, for keeping tabs on people. You see them start to surveil their own members. It's just a really great breakdown of how this ideology diverged from Marxist thinking and ended up being extremely self-serving. It really made me interested in reading more of the theory side of this revolution. And I've started to do that because I am in the middle of reading The Making of the English Working Class by E.P. Thompson, which is this huge theoretical breakdown of how the Industrial Revolution fomented all this class consciousness in England, which is still going strong today. But yeah, this is not a good book to start if you're interested in the Russian Revolution. I would instead recommend a more conventional narrative history, like A People's Tragedy by Orlando Figes. But yeah, if you're interested in this subject and you already have a certain amount of grounding, then you need to read Passage to Revolution. The next book I'm looking at is also one that I don't own a copy of, and also deals with issues of the working class. It's called The Employees, a workplace novel of the 22nd century by Olga Ravn. Ravn is a Danish poet, but she's also written 2 novellas as well, including The Employees. And The Employees is an unusual science fiction novel set deep into space on this corporate ship. And on this ship, you've got the employees who are pretty much emotionless and detached from their work. Some of them are even grown in a lab. They can't die of old age, and they are specifically bred to not form connections or deep bonds. They only think about work. But these employees bring back these strange objects from a planet that they discover, and the objects start having these uncanny effects on their psyche, where it kind of like reawakens the humanity in them and makes them sort of question the meaning and purpose of their lives and think, hey, maybe there's something beyond work out there for us. Maybe we kind of miss home after all. And so that puts them at cross purposes with the corporation. And the corporation decides to conduct a series of interviews to determine the impact that these strange objects and their effects are having on their bottom line. So the entire story is told through a series of these very short, very emotionless interviews that last like a page or less. All of the employees are only mentioned by numbers instead of their names. So it feels very disorienting and unnerving when you first start reading. And as you slowly piece together what the day-to-day life of these employees is like, it becomes increasingly ominous as you realize all these little ways that the corporation has of controlling thought, speech, and other things associated with the employees. And so the book becomes this very interesting reflection on corporate life and hustle culture. A lot of people in our society are not able to picture a world where we're not constantly grinding for the next paycheck. A book like this will make you question your own relation to work and make you wonder how much you would risk for a life that was fulfilling and meaningful to you, as opposed to just clocking in every day, repeating the same pattern until you're too old to work, and then you retire, if you can even afford to retire. So there's a lot of existential dread that gets dredged up in a book like this that's extremely relatable and speaks to a lot of the class stratification in our own society. It's a really original work, and although the format of just these very short interviews is going to be a little bit jarring and hard to get used to, I think it's worth it. And the fact that this book is short enough to get through in just like under 2 hours means that you're committing very little time to something like this. As someone who's struggled to get into science fiction, this was a huge breath of fresh air, and it's probably in my top 5 sci-fi novels now. Finally, we are at the top of my list, my favorite book of 2024. We've looked at a lot of unusual choices, a lot of out-of-the-way books like that, but don't be fooled by my hipster exterior. It turns out that I really am a basic bitch at heart, much like the main character in this book. It's called Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And yeah, this is one of the most famous American novels ever written. It gets assigned all the time in school, but I'm pretty lucky that I missed out on getting assigned this as a teenager, because I would have absolutely hated this book. I wouldn't have understood the ironic, satirical elements. It's written from the perspective of Holden Caulfield, who is just so unbearable, pretentious, edgy. He thinks he's the smartest guy. He hates all the fakers, but he's very fake himself. So yeah, as an adult, now with retrospect, I can look back on this period of my life and be like, oh my god, this lampoons it so well, and it speaks to how the society can shape you into being jaded, how trauma and bad family dynamics can affect who you become, and how people like Holden Caulfield are like so stuck in their own angst that they can't see that they're basically trapped in this very toxic, damaging way of seeing the world. So Holden Caulfield is a 17-year-old who gets expelled from his 4th boarding school in a row, and instead of immediately going home to face the wrath of his parents, he decides to bum around New York City for a few days with the last of his pocket money. So he goes around having these chance encounters with people that really get to the heart of who he is. It cuts through this facade that he's been putting up about how he's just so enlightened compared to everyone around him, and really speaks to all of these problems that are going on in the society that this was written in. All of these damaging expectations of masculinity, the trauma of his life and how it's impacted him, his bad family dynamic where he's kind of been a loner his whole life. So even though Holden Caulfield is often very insufferable, you come to understand why he is the way he is. And the book is able to pull a lot of really heartfelt moments out, especially at the end. But of course it's written in a very down-to-earth, grounded way. He writes in very simple English, he uses repetitive phrases, he isn't the smartest guy, and the way it's written captures all of that so clearly. It's a really provocative, moving novel. It takes a lot of patience because of how obnoxious Holden is all throughout. But if you let down your defenses a little bit, you'll find that it's a really great character study. It is a great satire of the society it's set in. It's really laugh out loud funny at certain points too, that's another thing. Yeah, just a really solid novel overall that taps into the post-war ennui that a lot of angsty teenagers were feeling that would be so influential in later counterculture movements like the beatniks or the hippies. Great novel. Definitely deserves its reputation. It's just, stop assigning it to teenagers because I understand why so many teens hate books like this. There you go, I made my obligatory year-end list of my favorite 5 books that I want you to check out but you won't check out because my tastes are trash, but that's okay. You probably have better taste than me, so you should get down in the comments and tell me what your favorite books were that you read last year, and what are some of the favorite books that you're looking forward to reading this year. I don't know, you could let me know. I mean, my bookshelf is completely fucking full, but I can find a way to squeeze more books into my list. So yeah, I've been deep in the reads. Happy 2025, and you can leave now.